Los demostrativos se utilizan para señalar o indicar algo en particular, ya sea en cercanía o lejanía. Los veremos con el verbo frasal bring up en pasado.
So I took her ears. So I actually brought this up with my wife. She's a...
Hey, just one of the things that kind of irked me was when I brought this up to that recruiter who got me that job in Busan.
And Vincent, you just brought this up in the context of in Europe, Brexit was, of course, a referendum. That
brought this up because there was actually a rather large section I cut out of.
When I brought this up to the London crew, they were like, oh, you know.
Okay, cool. I'm glad you brought this up.
Okay, this is an important. I'm glad you brought this up. So,
and I brought this up at one point. We talked to Cantor.
Now, part of the reason I brought this up is it's an easy and straightforward way for somebody to understand the.
When we brought this up to our African American informants, some of them like
naloxone more widely, right? Mr. President, Dr. Wen brought up this point. I think it's.
So I brought up this idea. What if we could just.
It is. Katie, you've brought up this dumb joke every day since. You're reading too much into it.
36, MIT professor George Owens brought up this exact issue.
Sowing trees and storms brought up this pretty cool idea for energy storage that our old friend
with your kids.
Media has brought up this stranger danger.
It is likely to be brought up this year.
And he brought up this concept of regulations.
I mean, it would not be brought up this way for any other reason. We can't
break here for just a moment. Demonstration. We brought these up. We might as well take a little break here for just a moment.
So I brought these up as examples because they are real life examples.
And I brought these up to some of the students that I would take.
I think most people highlight that was sort of brought up by these two is that it doesn't have to be hard. I think most people.
Some argued that perhaps the lake. When I brought up these fossils, some argued that perhaps the lake.
These values, you know, I've kind of been raised and brought up with these morals, these values.
Still hear the cry. When I brought up these fossils, some argued that perhaps the
groups universally brought up these as the four top matters.
But then when we brought up these papers the next time for him to sign,
a sense from his team or from his memory about how many times he's brought up these things.
And that, you know, people brought up these cases of, you know, is it worth
navigate DC? But he brought up these traditions as well.
The community, to what extent? And so since you've already brought that up, obviously the two of you are all in.
Really all you need. But yeah, as soon as I brought that up, their mood, their tone totally changed on me. They were like,
it's interesting you brought that up because I remember. Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I do want to ask.
I'm glad you brought that up. We do have our new pantry.
It's important. I'm so glad that you brought that up, Marie. Impact sourcing is a new term.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so
actions. I'm glad you brought that up since 2005.
And so that tweet brought up that trauma.
Yep. You know, when I was, I brought up that slide of the node coastline.
Brought up that way.
Yes. When abortion is brought up, that it's necessary to kill that child, sometimes.
That's who I am.
What you just brought up, that needs to be heard.
By the way I was brought up, which I'm glad I was brought up that way.
That was brought up that allowed that success to happen.
Side op is again brought up that this
yesterday, and he brought up that one company that he's aware of is
when abortion is brought up, that it's necessary to kill that child, sometimes to save them.
Reach your goals from how you're brought up, that you can really reach your goals.
Our ovens and our sensors, right? So we dug later, brought those up into our ovens and our sensors.
Fantastic points, Steve. I'm glad you brought those up. I mean, we're
for North America and brought those up within the magma.
Bathroom cabinet or in the kitchen cabinet, brought those up, and I put like all the fabric.
Melissa brought up, but more so
that she's brought those up.
Not sure what, I'm sure you brought those up to the right level of attention.
So that was fascinating when you brought those up to me, that somebody's actually written them down.
Vanessa has brought those up for you.
To us, and we'll have those brought up to the podium.
Sensitive to those issues once they're brought up.
Those things that we are brought up with.
The two particular, I think, you know, the reason I brought up those, the two particular examples that I talked
Group. Yeah, I think it's already brought up those old fault lines that were already in existence, right?
Children, you know, you brought up those who have lost their parents.
And we brought up those concerns to our pediatrician. They
gambling, and I think it's really interesting you brought up the shooting dice thing.
Question, because you brought up those two cities.
This is a long game, and that's why even during a pandemic, I brought up those slides about the anti-vaxxers.
So I brought up those 4 prongs of
with APHL, and thank you for those who have brought up those trainings and all the work.
It's a real bonus. So
great. I'm glad you brought up those timelines, Joe, because you know.